The house at Black Hollow. For as long as anyone could remember, the house at Black Hollow had stood abandoned. Its tall, looming silhouette was a constant reminder of the tragedy that had befallen the family who once lived there. Over the years, the house had become something of a legend among the locals, a place of curses, of whispers in the dark, and things that went bump in the night. Most of the residents of Black Hollow refused to even drive past the house, let alone go inside. Its Gothic structure was swallowed by the dense, twisting forest that had overtaken it. The trees surrounding it seemed to lean in, like they were trying to smother the house, trap it, hold it in place. Even the birds and animals stayed clear of the property. But there was one person who wasn't afraid, Mia Turner. Mia had grown up hearing all the stories about the house, the disappearances, the eerie sounds, the strange occurrences that people swore had happened to anyone who got too close. But she didn't believe in ghost stories. She was a journalist, and she'd made a career out of debunking paranormal myths, so when she returned to Black Hollow after being away for 10 years, she saw the house not as a place of fear, but as an opportunity. After all, every small town has its ghost story, but she wanted to uncover the truth behind this one. Chapter 1: The Invitation. Mia was determined to find out what really happened at the house. The legends told of the Whitlock family, who had lived there in the 1800s. They were once wealthy and prominent, but something went terribly wrong. One night, the entire family, mother, father, and their 2 children, vanished without a trace. Some said they were murdered, others believed they had gone mad and fled into the forest. But there were those who whispered of something darker, something lurking in the house itself, waiting for anyone foolish enough to enter. Mia arrived at Black Hollow on a crisp autumn afternoon. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay, and the wind whispered through the trees. She rented a small cabin in town and wasted no time heading to the house. The townspeople gave her strange looks when she mentioned her plan to visit the old Whitlock mansion. An elderly woman named Mrs. Henley grabbed her arm as she passed by and whispered, "Don't go there, dear. That house. It takes people. It doesn't let them go." Mia smiled politely, used to such warnings, but inside, she felt a slight twinge of unease. The house loomed large as she approached it. The gate was rusted, and the garden was overgrown with thick vines, crawling over everything as if trying to swallow the house whole. She pushed open the heavy iron gate, which groaned in protest. Her footsteps crunched along the gravel pathway that led up to the front door. With each step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. But there was no one around, just the wind and the house. Mia took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The air inside was heavy, stale, and cold, despite the warmth outside. Dust coated everything, the furniture, the floor, the walls. It was like time had stopped the day the Whitlocks disappeared. But what caught her attention most was the silence. It was oppressive, thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath. She pulled out her notebook and began to explore. The first floor was surprisingly intact, though the wallpaper had faded, and the wood was rotting. She made her way through the kitchen, the dining room, and the grand parlor, all eerily undisturbed. Then she found the stairs leading to the second floor. The old wood creaked under her weight as she ascended, and her heart pounded a little harder with each step. When she reached the top, a long hallway stretched before her. There were several rooms on either side, but it was the door at the very end that drew her in. It was slightly ajar. With cautious steps, Mia approached the door and gently pushed it open. The room inside was a bedroom, presumably the master bedroom. It was dark, with heavy curtains covering the windows. But the bed was neatly made, as if someone had just left and was expected to return at any moment. As Mia looked around, something caught her eye, a single piece of paper lying on the bedside table. It was old, yellowed with age, but the ink was still visible. It read, "They are watching. Always watching. We cannot leave. The house will not let us." Mia felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. Her rational mind told her it was just a trick of fear, but something else, something deeper, told her that the house wasn't as empty as it seemed. Chapter 2: The Presence. That night, back at her cabin, Mia reviewed the day's notes, her mind unable to shake the strange feeling that had lingered since she left the house. The note she'd found gnawed at her. Who had written it? One of the Whitlocks? Or was it someone else who had entered the house long after they were gone? As she lay in bed, the wind howled outside, and the trees scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it, a knock. Mia's eyes snapped open, and she listened carefully. Knock, knock, knock. It was soft at first, like someone tapping gently. She held her breath, straining to hear. Then it came again, louder this time. It was coming from the front door. She glanced at the clock. Midnight. Her pulse quickened. She stood, wrapping a blanket around herself, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, she saw nothing, just the dark forest, swaying in the wind. Slowly, she opened the door, but the porch was empty. No footprints, no sign of anyone. As she turned to close the door, she heard it again, but this time, it was coming from inside. Knock, knock, knock. Her heart raced as she spun around. The sound echoed through the cabin, but she couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw something, a shadow, darker than the night, moving across the far wall. Mia froze. The shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, slowly taking shape. It moved toward her, creeping closer, but when she blinked, it was gone. The cabin fell silent once more. Shaken, Mia shut the door and locked it, though she knew, deep down, that locks wouldn't keep out whatever was playing with her. Chapter 3, The Secrets of the House. The next morning, Mia returned to the house. Despite the fear that gnawed at her, she was determined to finish her investigation. Something was happening, and the journalist in her needed to know what. As she entered the house again, she noticed a change. The air felt heavier, more oppressive. The shadows seemed deeper, darker. And she could no longer shake the feeling of being watched. She made her way back to the master bedroom, where she'd found the note. But this time, there was something different. The bed, which had been neatly made the day before, was now unmade, the sheets pulled back as if someone had just gotten up. Then she noticed something on the floor, a trail of footprints in the dust, leading from the bed to the door. They weren't hers. They were too small. Mia followed the footprints down the hall, her heart racing with each step. They led her to a room she hadn't noticed before, a small door at the end of the hall that she'd assumed was a closet. She pushed it open, and behind it was a narrow staircase, leading up to an attic. The stairs groaned as she climbed them, the air growing colder with every step. At the top was a small, cramped room with slanted ceilings. It was empty, save for an old rocking chair in the corner, and a mirror leaning against the wall. As Mia stepped closer to the mirror, she saw her reflection. But there was something wrong with it. The room behind her was empty, but in the reflection, there was something standing just behind her, a figure, shrouded in darkness, its face obscured. Mia spun around, but the room was empty. Her reflection, however, showed otherwise. The figure in the mirror began to move, stepping closer to her reflection, while in reality, nothing was there. Panic surged through Mia as she stumbled back toward the stairs. As she turned to leave, she heard it again, knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed from the walls, from the very bones of the house. It grew louder, faster, until it felt like the walls themselves were trembling. And then, all at once, it stopped. Mia fled the house, breathless, her heart pounding. But the worst was yet to come. Chapter 4, The Haunting. The next few nights were sleepless. Every time Mia closed her eyes, she saw the house, the shadowy figure, and the knocking, always the knocking. She knew she had to leave Black Hollow. Whatever haunted that house had followed her, and she feared it was only a matter of time before it took her, just like it had taken the Whitlocks. On her last night in town, as she packed her bags, the knocking returned. This time it was louder than ever, as if the very